They believed that incinerating my home would compel me to join their precious HOA. The one thing they failed to consider is that I was the literal author of the municipal fire codes they had just breached. I'm Marcus, and I am standing amidst the ruins of my kitchen, clutching the very legal binder that resulted in an 8-year federal prison sentence for my HOA president. Just 6 months prior, this was my family's cherished dream home, where my children would feed chickens each morning. Now, it is a heap of cinders and the conclusive evidence that unraveled a multi-million-dollar fraud ring. The biting scent of damp charcoal clings to my clothing, a haunting reminder of the life they attempted to obliterate. I'm sipping coffee from a thermos because, naturally, it's impossible to brew a cup when your kitchen is a smoldering crater, but this is what Brenda Kensington hadn't anticipated. When you attempt to burn down the home of a code enforcer, you'd better be certain you don't leave any evidence. Spoiler. She left a trail of everything. It led to FBI raids, handcuffs, and the full smorgasbord of justice. What would you do if your neighbors made a literal attempt to burn you out of your home? Leave a comment below and let me know where you are tuning in from. I'm curious to see just how far this HOA nightmare extends. My name is Marcus Thorne, and for a quarter of a century, I've been the individual who appears when your neighbor erects a deck without a permit or operates a meth lab from their garage. I am a municipal code enforcement officer. Essentially, I police the rulebook. My wife, Elena, is a high school principal, and together we have teenage twins, Dakota and River, who considered me the most uninteresting father on earth. Up until this whole saga, they were likely correct. Our house was situated on 2 acres of land that was once farmland, a legacy from my grandfather who cultivated corn and aspirations here back in the 1940s. The property was grandfathered in when the surrounding subdivision materialized like mushrooms after a downpour. As our neighbors received quarter-acre plots governed by HOA covenants, we retained our wraparound porch, vegetable garden, workshop, and, indeed, a small flock of chickens that supplied us with fresh eggs and provided endless amusement for our children. Every morning, I would sit on that porch with my coffee, listening to the roosters crow and watching Elena care for her herb garden. The aroma of basil and oregano would mingle with the earthy fragrance of the tilled soil. Dakota and River would scatter feed for the chickens before heading to school, their laughter bouncing off the workshop walls where I spent weekends restoring antique furniture. It was tranquil, it was our own, and it seems it was driving someone completely mad. Enter Brenda Kensington. Envision every stereotype of an HOA president, then supplement it with a dose of ambition and a real estate license. She had platinum blonde hair that was impervious to wind, a white Lexus that was always spotless, and yoga pants that were more expensive than most people's monthly rent. She had relocated from California 6 months before, with the expectation that her investment would be safeguarded by what she referred to as community standards. Our property, with its chickens, rows of vegetables, and workshop clutter, did not align with the Pinterest-perfect ideal she had paid a premium to be a part of. Her initial visit was accompanied by homemade cookies and a disarming smile. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she chirped, despite the fact that we had resided there for 15 years longer than she had. "I've brought along an HOA application. It's merely a formality to get you integrated into our wonderful community." I accepted the cookies, thanked her, and politely clarified that our property existed 3 decades before the HOA was formed. We were not obligated to join, and to be honest, we cherished our autonomy. Her smile wavered like a failing fluorescent bulb. Week 3 delivered a certified letter concerning community standards and the protection of property values. By week 6, the situation had escalated to anonymous complaints lodged with the city regarding our agricultural activities in a residential zone. This is where it became intriguing. You see, after dedicating 25 years to memorizing municipal codes, you get to know them intimately. I retrieved my copy, the same substantial binder that would later be instrumental in her conviction, and highlighted Section 12.3.7. Agricultural grandfather clauses for properties predating residential zoning. Our chickens were lawful, our garden was lawful, our workshop was lawful. It was all perfectly legal because I had personally contributed to writing the ordinances designed to protect properties precisely like ours. But Brenda was not the kind of person who would be deterred by legal fine print. The complaints persisted. 17 distinct violations were reported in a single week. Illegal chickens, unpermitted structures, commercial vegetable operations, noise disturbances. I would get to work and find my desk buried under stacks of paperwork, each one featuring Brenda's meticulous handwriting and our address. My supervisor, who is also a longtime friend, took me aside. "Marcus, what on earth is happening with your neighbor?" That evening, I stumbled upon something that altered the entire dynamic. While going over the complaint forms, I saw that Brenda had categorized our property as a commercial farm operation in several of the reports. Not only was this utterly untrue, but filing false municipal reports constitutes a Class C misdemeanor, punishable by a $500 fine for each occurrence. Here is your first piece of valuable information. Falsely reporting code violations is illegal in most states. Always scrutinize complaint forms. A single falsehood can transform harassment into criminal activity. Elena discovered me at the kitchen table that night, inundated with paperwork and code books. "What's on your mind?" she inquired, placing a fresh cup of coffee before me that smelled like deliverance. "I'm thinking," I responded, "that our new neighbor has just made her first significant error." Brenda's subsequent tactic was what I term the compliance blitz, a strategy one had witnessed bullies employ in the past, though never with such systematic precision. If a single complaint failed to produce results, perhaps 17 would. Monday brought a complaint about an illegal chicken coop violating setback requirements. Tuesday, it was an unpermitted workshop addition posing a fire hazard. Wednesday, a commercial vegetable operation lacking a business license. By Friday, my desk resembled the aftermath of a paper avalanche. But here's the advantage of being a code enforcement officer for 25 years. You cultivate an instinct for deceit that can detect falsehoods through solid concrete. Every single complaint employed identical wording, was filed at precisely 8:47 a.m., and included details that could only be observed from our property line. Someone was dedicating their full-time efforts to this. The final straw was when Brenda began organizing wellness walks past our home with other HOA wives. Imagine 5 women in coordinated athleisure wear, gripping their phones like armaments, whispering behind their manicured hands while capturing photos of our chicken coop as if it were evidence of war atrocities. The incessant clicking of phone cameras became the new soundtrack to our mornings, blending with the bewildered clucking of chickens who had unexpectedly achieved Instagram stardom. "This is becoming absurd," Elena remarked, observing the procession from our kitchen window. "What is she planning next?"
Aérial surveillance.
Her concern was not misplaced, but I was on the verge of turning the situation to my advantage. I resolved to investigate these complaints more thoroughly, and that's when I uncovered Brenda's first critical blunder. On 3 separate violation reports, she had identified our property as a commercial farm operation, not as a residential property with grandfathered agricultural rights. This meant it was being classified as a full-scale commercial farm that would need business licenses, health department inspections, and commercial zoning permits. I had encountered this tactic before in my career. Desperate complainants would misrepresent property descriptions, hoping to activate different enforcement measures. What they often failed to grasp is that intentionally miscategorizing property types on official municipal documents is considered filing false instruments, a misdemeanor that carries fines of up to $500 per incident. I had personally prosecuted 3 such cases, and the defendants always appeared stunned when they were placed in handcuffs. It was time for my initial counteroffensive. I submitted a formal complaint against Brenda to the city attorney's office, meticulously documenting every false claim and asking for an investigation into the pattern of harassment. Then, I leaned back and awaited the outcome. The city dispatched its most junior inspector, a recent college graduate who had likely never seen an actual chicken coop outside of Instagram. I met him at the edge of our property armed with my code book, the original 1963 building permits, and the surveyor's map from 1940 showing our lot boundaries. "Let's begin with the chickens," I proposed, turning to the appropriate section. Municipal Ordinance 12(3)(7) specifically safeguards agricultural uses that predate residential zoning. Our coop was constructed in 1963. The residential zoning wasn't established until 1987. The young man's clipboard seemed to bend under the sheer volume of Brenda's complaints. We systematically surveyed the property. Chickens? Legal. Workshop? Permitted and inspected. Vegetable garden? Clearly for personal use. Every single alleged violation was marked as unfounded, accompanied by notes detailing the pattern of harassment. The sound of a measuring tape snapping across garden beds mingled with the contented clucking of vindicated chickens. It seemed even they understood that justice was prevailing. 24 hours later, the city affixed a no violations found notice to our front gate. a bright yellow signal easily visible from Brenda's living room window. That was when I witnessed the first Brenda meltdown. I was retrieving the mail when she marched across the street, her yoga pants almost smoldering from her rapid advance. "This is preposterous," she yelled, loud enough for 3 neighbors to peer out from their windows. "That inspector clearly has no idea what he's doing." "Ma'am," the rookie inspector interjected from his truck. "This gentleman possesses a deeper knowledge of municipal code than most attorneys. Every aspect of this property is entirely legal." Brenda's face cycled through several shades of crimson before landing on a hue I had never seen in nature. "This is not over, Marcus," she hissed, pointing a finger toward our house. "There is more than one way to resolve a property issue." The menace lingered in the air like smoke from a grease fire, and I felt a shift within me. This was no longer about chickens. That evening, Elena pointed out something that set my investigative senses on high alert. "Have you noticed the number of people walking past our house recently?" she asked, drawing the curtains. "That's the 5th car in the last hour that has slowed down by our driveway." She was correct. Our tranquil cul-de-sac had suddenly developed more foot traffic than a shopping center. Strangers holding phones, unfamiliar vehicles cruising by, and curtains across the street fluttering like anxious eyelids. But the true turning point occurred when I chose to look into our HOA president's history. What I uncovered sent a chill down my spine. Brenda Kensington was licensed as a real estate agent in 3 states: California, Arizona, and now Texas. More revealingly, a distinct pattern became apparent in her former neighborhoods. Holdout properties that declined HOA membership had a tendency to encounter mysterious problems: a house fire in Phoenix, an accidental flood in Tucson, and 3 property condemnations in San Diego. All were ultimately sold to developers for prices below market value, and all were acquired by shell companies that shared a single common link. Brenda Kensington served as the listing agent. "Elena," I said that night, spreading property records across our kitchen table, as if I were a detective constructing a murder investigation. "I don't think we are dealing with a merely aggressive neighbor anymore. I believe we are up against a professional." If Brenda was indeed a professional, she was about to reveal her strategy, and to be frank, it was far more calculated than I had initially assumed. Her subsequent move was what crisis management professionals refer to as social isolation. Alienating the target from the community until they feel they have no option but to capitulate. Within 48 hours of my complaint being lodged, she had formed something called the Neighborhood Safety Committee, complete with official-looking letterhead. The flyers began to materialize on car windshields on Tuesday morning. "Concerned about unregulated agricultural chemicals near our children? Join us in protecting Willowbrook's families." The flyer was adorned with stock images of smiling children and a list of health risks that would lead one to believe our chicken coop was a new Chernobyl. But it was on social media that Brenda truly demonstrated her skill. The Concerned Parents of Willowbrook Facebook group swelled to 87 members in a single night. Posts began to appear on an hourly basis. Photos of our cluttered workshop labeled a potential fire hazard, close-ups of our compost heap described as a rodent attractant, and my personal favorite, an image of our rain barrel with the caption, "Standing water breeding mosquitoes and disease." Elena learned of the group's existence when fellow teachers began to ask her uncomfortable questions. "Is it true that your husband is running some kind of unlicensed farm operation?" A colleague whispered to her during lunch duty. "I saw the pictures online." The campaign of social pressure soon affected our children. Dakota returned home from school one day, unusually quiet and just picking at her food. "What's the matter, sweetheart?" Elena inquired. "No one wanted to sit with me at lunch today," Dakota confessed in a low voice. "Sarah's mom told her our house might be making people sick." River, who was normally our social butterfly, shared that his friend Tyler was no longer allowed to visit. His parents mentioned something about an unsafe environment and liability concerns. He explained, the confusion evident in his voice. The silence at our once friendly bus stop was palpable. Vacant seats surrounded our children at lunchtime. Conversations among parents would cease the moment Elena entered a school function. The scent of isolation was more potent than any barnyard smell Brenda professed to be concerned about. However, I had been documenting harassment campaigns for 2 decades, and I possessed knowledge that Brenda did not. Bullies invariably become careless when they believe they are succeeding. It was time for counterpunch number 2. I utilized my lunch breaks to investigate Brenda's own properties through municipal databases. A skill I had honed over years of pursuing slum landlords and code violators. What I uncovered was pure gold. Brenda was the owner of 3 rental properties in our city, held through an LLC named Premier Property Solutions. I had, in fact, authored several of the inspection protocols she was about to become very well acquainted with. By cross-referencing violation histories, I unearthed a beautiful discovery. 3 active code violations at her duplex rental located at 847 Maple Street. There was an unpermitted bathroom addition from 2019, an outdated electrical panel creating a fire hazard, and a blocked fire exit due to the illegal placement of a storage unit. All of these were violations I had personally marked for follow-up, which had somehow never been addressed. In my experience, property managers who disregard safety violations often find their motivation when their own liability is at risk. I submitted new complaints using Brenda's own previous phrasing almost verbatim, because I have that particular sense of humor. The city inspector visited Brenda's duplex on a Thursday morning. I was not present, of course, but public records narrate a wonderful tale. The violations were confirmed. Fines amounting to $2,400 were issued, along with mandatory corrections to be completed within 30 days, or she would face tenant relocation assistance requirements. Her tenants were served notices that same afternoon. Friday evening, as I was loading groceries into my car, Brenda accosted me in the Walmart parking lot. 3 individuals, including Mrs. Henderson from our street, witnessed our HOA president completely lose her composure. "You think you're so clever with your little code book?" she spat, her voice echoing across the rows of shopping carts. "Some problems can't be resolved with paperwork, Marcus. Some problems demand more creative solutions." The squeaking of grocery cart wheels and the hum of fluorescent lights provided a strangely suburban backdrop to what felt like a threat from a gangster film. Other shoppers moved away as if we were radioactive. "Are you threatening me, ma'am?" I asked in a calm tone, ensuring my voice was audible to our audience. "I'm just saying," she retorted. "Accidents happen, house fires, gas leaks. Sometimes, old properties just start having problems." Mrs. Henderson's gasp could be heard from 20 feet away. That night, Elena and I sat on our back porch, watching the sunset cast a golden glow over our vegetable garden. The peace now felt precarious, like something precious that someone was intent on shattering. "The community is divided," Elena noted. "Half the neighborhood believes we are dangerous eccentrics, and the other half thinks Brenda has lost her mind." She was correct. The HOA members had split into factions. Team Brenda, composed of recent arrivals and investment property owners. Team Marcus, consisting of longtime residents and families. And the neutrals, primarily retirees who preferred to steer clear of conflict. But something else was unfolding that made my investigative senses scream with alarm. I had begun to receive anonymous calls at my workplace, with someone inquiring about my patrol schedule, my usual routes home, and when I typically conducted property inspections, the caller would always disconnect before I could trace the number. Then, Dakota mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "Dad, a man in a pickup truck asked me yesterday if you were home. He claimed to be a delivery driver, but he wasn't carrying any packages." It was then I understood that this had escalated beyond a neighborhood disagreement into something far more perilous, and I began to monitor our security cameras with much greater diligence. Brenda's next action demonstrated that she was not merely spiteful. She was also strategic. If social pressure was ineffective, she would aim directly for my livelihood. On Monday morning, my supervisor, Dave, summoned me to his office, wearing the expression of a man about to deliver a terminal diagnosis. "Marcus, I need to speak with you regarding a formal complaint that has been filed against you." The accusations were specific, professional, and damning. Abuse of position, use of city resources for personal vendettas, and intimidation of citizens through selective enforcement. Brenda had supplied evidence. Timestamps that showed my property research conducted during work hours, copies of my complaints against her, and even witness statements asserting that I had threatened her with regulatory retaliation. "You know this is bogus, right?" Dave said, pushing the paperwork across his desk. "But Internal Affairs is obligated to investigate." "I'm sorry, Marcus, but I have to reassign you pending the review." The fluorescent lights in the conference room buzzed like incensed wasps throughout my 3-hour interview. My coffee went cold as a stenographer's pen scratched across paper, chronicling every question about my professional conduct. 25 years of unblemished service were being reduced to timestamps and conflicting accounts. A temporary reassignment to minimize the appearance of impropriety meant I would be shuffling papers in the basement while Brenda portrayed me as a corrupt official. The irony had the bitter taste of burnt coffee, but I had learned something during my years of investigating fraud cases. Desperate people make bigger mistakes. It was time for my third counterpunch. I submitted a Freedom of Information Act request for all city communications related to my property. Every email, phone call, meeting note, and complaint, the response was a masterclass in coordinated harassment. Brenda had not only contacted my department. She had also reached out to the city attorney, the mayor's office, the planning commission, and the health department. The script was identical each time, as if she were reading from a telemarketer's guide. More significantly, this pattern was a perfect match to what I had discovered in public records from her previous cities. The woman had refined harassment into a science. Elena began to photograph every coincidental encounter. Brenda jogging past our house 5 times a day, unfamiliar cars slowing down at our driveway, neighbors who suddenly had an urgent need to walk their dogs right by our fence. We told the twins to record any adult who approached them with questions about our family. I had a comprehensive security system installed, with every camera and sensor legally permitted for property owner surveillance. The red blinking of motion detectors blended with the digital hum of recording equipment, transforming our peaceful home into something that resembled a fortress. The psychological pressure was having precisely the effect Brenda had intended. Sleep became fragmented, punctuated by checks of the camera feeds. Elena would startle at any unexpected sound. The kids began to ask why we couldn't just be normal neighbors like everyone else. Then, the emergency HOA board meeting was announced. Our neighbor, Terry Wilson, one of the individuals trying to remain neutral, knocked on our door on Thursday evening with news that made my stomach clench. "They're calling for a vote tomorrow night," he informed me, shifting uneasily on our porch. "It's about hiring a property management company to handle community threats. Brenda has 3 new board members who moved in last month, and she's pushing for emergency assessment authority." In plain English, they intended to hire professional intimidators under a veneer of legality. I had witnessed this tactic in other cities. Companies specializing in making holdout properties developed problems until the owners were forced to sell below market value. 3 longtime board members had already stepped down rather than be a part of what one described as legalized extortion. Friday brought a new level of escalation that crossed every conceivable line. At 9:47 p.m., the police arrived at our home in response to a domestic disturbance call. We were enjoying dinner on our back porch, hardly a scene of violent crime. The responding officer, someone I had worked with for years, looked mortified. "Marcus, this is the 3rd false emergency call this month," Officer Rodriguez stated, observing our clearly tranquil household. "Someone is playing games with the 911 dispatch." I knew from my enforcement training that filing false emergency reports is a felony offense that can carry a prison sentence of up to 2 years. But proving the source of anonymous 911 calls would require phone records and an investigation beyond my current capabilities. My evidence file had expanded to occupy an entire cabinet. False reports, harassment timelines, financial research on Brenda, and pattern analysis from other cities. Elena found me there one night, arranging documents as if I were preparing for battle. "You're building a case as though you expect to go to court," she remarked. "Because I believe that is exactly where this is headed," I answered, holding up property transfer records that revealed the true extent of Brenda's operation. Then, Sunday morning delivered the escalation that transformed harassment into attempted murder. I discovered our chickens dead in their coop, their water having been poisoned with antifreeze. The sharp, chemical odor stung my nostrils as I knelt beside the birds that had brought our family daily delight. Dakota's tears mingled with my fury as we buried justice, liberty, and hope, names the children had chosen, which now felt chillingly prophetic. The veterinary report confirmed antifreeze poisoning. Security footage captured a figure dressed in dark clothing entering our property at 3:17 a.m. The image was too indistinct for positive identification but was clearly intentional. However, the real breakthrough occurred when I found that the vandalism was not an act of random teenage troublemaking. Our workshop door had been spray-painted with the words "Move" in red letters. The security footage had captured the culprit. A teenage boy from an HOA family, When I located the boy using his license plate number, his tearful confession revealed something that changed the entire situation. A neighborhood lady had paid him $200 to poison the chickens and spray paint our building. The boy did not know her name, but his description of her was unmistakable. Platinum blonde, a white Lexus, and her usual yoga pants uniform. Instead of pressing charges against a minor who was being used as a pawn, I documented the source of the payment and added this information to my ever-expanding case file. The true target was not a confused teenager. It was the adult who was orchestrating a criminal conspiracy. Elena, I said that night, spreading bank records and timeline charts across our kitchen table. We are no longer dealing with neighborly harassment. We are dealing with organized crime. 3 in the morning is when the most effective detective work gets done. It's when your mind is just weary enough to perceive patterns it would typically overlook and desperate enough to delve into archives that most people disregard. I was hunched over my home office computer, flanked by empty coffee cups and highlighted documents, when Elena entered, clad in her bathrobe and wearing a look of concern. "Still searching for your smoking gun?" she inquired, setting down a fresh cup of coffee. That smelled like a lifeline, more like searching for the puppet master. I replied under my breath, navigating through municipal contract archives I had accessed with my city credentials, because nothing about this situation felt coincidental anymore. That's when I discovered it, tucked away in filing cabinets most people didn't even know were there. The original HOA incorporation documents from 2018 included a clause I had never encountered before: an emergency property acquisition protocol. The text was dense legal jargon that essentially boiled down to one alarming concept. The HOA board had the authority to compel the sale of any property classified as a community threat through municipal partnership agreements. Elena read over my shoulder, her principal's expertise helping her decipher the bureaucratic language. "Emergency eminent domain," she whispered. "Can they legally do that?" I was already cross-referencing the signatures on the incorporation papers. City Council member Patricia Webb had approved the HOA's legal structure. This was the same Patricia Webb who was the current chair of our zoning appeals board and who voted on eminent domain cases. Webb's history made my investigative instincts scream. She was a former business partner of Brenda's in California and now held a position that controlled property acquisition appeals. And here was the clincher. She had never disclosed this relationship as a conflict of interest. "Elena, look at this," I said, displaying property transfer records. Similar HOA structures existed in Phoenix, Tucson, and San Diego. All cities where Brenda had operated previously, the same legal framework, the same acquisition protocols, the same mysterious property issues. The pattern was staggering in its scale. They would target non-conforming properties, fabricate community crises, and then force buyouts using emergency procedures that circumvented standard appeals. The properties were subsequently resold to developers at a 300% markup through shell companies. Elena's research abilities were invaluable at this stage. By utilizing school district databases she had access to, she began to trace property transfers across different states. What surfaced was a business model masquerading as community activism. "Marcus, look at these figures," she said, highlighting transfer amounts on her laptop. 7 properties across 3 cities, all adhering to the same timeline. They have cleared an estimated $1 million over 5 years. But the definitive proof came when I found recent amendments to our city's fire inspection protocols. New policies mandated that properties with agricultural elements must undergo quarterly inspections. Policies that had been authored by Councilwoman Webb and implemented exactly 60 days ago, a month before Brenda's first complaint against us. The timing was surgically precise. Property tax records showed that Brenda's shell company, Willowbrook Development LLC, had been incorporated 3 months ago for the stated purpose of residential property acquisition and improvement. Its financial backing was traced to an anonymous investment fund that led back to her partners in California. The target properties were my home and 2 other non-HOA parcels, with a combined value of $1.8 million. "Elena," I said, leaning back in my chair as the full magnitude of the situation hit me like a physical force. "They are not trying to get me to join the HOA. They are trying to steal my property. The harassment, the false reports, the social pressure campaign. None of it was ever about community standards or property values. It was all about creating a pretext for a forced acquisition, using legal loopholes they had spent years perfecting." "So, what's our next move?" Elena asked, her voice firm despite the gravity of what we had just uncovered. I surveyed the evidence laid out across our desk. Municipal violations, undisclosed conflicts of interest, patterns of interstate fraud, and a conspiracy to interfere with property rights. Then, I smiled for the first time in weeks. We used the law exactly as it was intended. I declared, reaching for my phone, it's time to call in some favors and build a case that will make federal prosecutors very, very happy. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and unlike Brenda, I actually knew how to play by the rules. It was time to gather my team. Fortunately for me, 25 years in municipal enforcement had helped me cultivate some very useful connections. My first call was to Jake Morrison, my old college roommate, who had since become an investigative reporter for the regional newspaper. I had provided him with tips on municipal corruption cases for years. Now, I needed him to reciprocate. Marcus, it's 3:30 in the morning. Jake's tired voice crackled through the phone. Jake, do you remember that favor you owe me from the city council bribery story? It's time to call it in. How would you like to uncover a multi-state property fraud conspiracy? He was suddenly wide awake. I'll be there in an hour. Second call, Carmen Rodriguez, a law school friend of Elena's who had forged a career defending property rights violations. She specialized in taking on large corporations that intimidated homeowners. This case was perfectly suited to her expertise. A pro bono case with national implications for HOA overreach? Carmen said after I laid out the situation. Marcus, you had my attention at federal conspiracy charges. Third call, Tom Morgan, a forensic accountant whose elderly parents I had assisted with code compliance issues the previous year. Tom could trace money through shell companies with the skill of a bloodhound on a scent trail. Someone tried to steal your house through legal fraud? Tom's voice was filled with the indignation of someone who took financial crimes personally. Oh, we are going to nail these people to the wall. By sunrise, my workshop had been transformed into a command center that would make an FBI task force envious. Bulletin boards plastered every wall, with colored string connecting the players and mapping their relationships. Financial flowcharts illustrated the movement of money across state lines. Timeline boards detailed the progression from harassment to attempted arson. The aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the rustle of documents and the squeak of markers on whiteboards as we constructed our case. Carmen arranged legal precedents on my workbench like a general mapping out an invasion. Civil conspiracy has 3 key elements, she explained, highlighting relevant case law. An agreement between the parties, overt acts committed in furtherance of the conspiracy, and resulting damages. We have recorded conversations that prove an agreement, documented harassment as overt acts, and property devaluation plus emotional distress for damages. Tom's laptop whirred as he tracked financial links through public records. The Corporate Transparency Act, legislation most people overlook, mandates that shell companies file beneficial ownership reports. What Tom discovered made us all whistle in admiration. $4, $2 million investment fund, he announced, displaying incorporation documents, 7 silent partners, all with addresses in California, and here's the best part. 2 of them have prior fraud investigations in federal databases. Jake detailed his media plan while photographing our evidence boards. I'm titling this series The HOA Hustle. How Neighbors Become Predators. It's a local story with national significance. HOA abuse impacts 73 million Americans. We'll synchronize the publication with your legal filings to achieve maximum impact. I had enhanced our security system with professional-grade hardware, leveraging Texas's one-party consent laws for recording conversations. Anyone setting foot on our property was now being documented in high definition with cloud-based backup storage. As I had learned from years of building legal cases, solid documentation consistently trumps skilled lawyers. Elena hosted a concerned parents' coffee meeting, ostensibly to talk about school safety. Her true objective was to identify HOA members who were growing uneasy with Brenda's increasingly aggressive methods. 3 families discreetly shared internal HOA communications that showed cracks forming in Brenda's support. The intelligence jackpot was an emergency board meeting set for Friday, where Brenda intended to push through a vote on the property acquisition proceedings. Our evidence package evolved into 3 distinct lines of attack. A criminal referral to the district attorney for wire fraud, conspiracy, and filing false reports. a civil complaint for conspiracy to interfere with property rights and intentional infliction of emotional distress, and an ethics complaint against Councilwoman Webb for undisclosed conflicts of interest. Carmen orchestrated our timing with military-like precision. T-3 days, we file the ethics complaint, forcing Webb to recuse herself from any property votes. T-2 days, the civil lawsuit goes public, generating media attention. T-1 day, the criminal referral gets escalated to law enforcement. On T-day, Jake's story is published, creating maximum public pressure. But we needed an inside view of Friday's emergency HOA meeting. That's where our neighbor, Terry Wilson, who was still attempting to remain neutral, became indispensable. HOA meetings were, by state law, technically open to the public, and Terry consented to attend while live-streaming the video from his phone. If they vote for the property acquisition, I explained to the team, we will have real-time evidence of a conspiracy in progress. We formulated contingency plans for every possible outcome. If the legal strategy faltered, media exposure would still dismantle Brenda's business model. If they moved up their timeline, we had emergency injunction papers prepared. If they attempted to target members of our team, Tom had already made contact with the FBI's Interstate Fraud Division. Personal preparations felt like getting ready for a siege. Elena took a leave of absence from school. The twins went to stay with their grandparents. I arranged for temporary security at Elena's workplace and set up a legal defense fund with our savings. The final component came together when Carmen found a precedent from a similar case in Nevada. Thorne versus Kensington is going to become case law. She stated with satisfaction, win or lose, this battle will change how HOAs operate across the country. Friday morning dawned gray and cold, a perfect match for my mood. Elena found me performing a final check of the equipment. Ready for war? She asked. I looked at our evidence, our team, and our legally airtight strategy. Then I smiled. Elena, I've been preparing for this fight my entire career. It's time to show these people what happens when you mess with someone who actually knows the rules. If I had considered Brenda desperate before, I was about to discover what genuine desperation entailed. And frankly, it was frightening in its ingenuity. Tuesday morning brought news that made my blood run cold. Brenda's home had been burglarized during the night. A break-in so opportune it might as well have had a neon sign that read "False Flag Operation." According to her police report, the burglars had taken membership files, financial records, and her computer's hard drive. No valuables like jewelry or electronics, of course, just the precise documents that would hold evidence of her campaign of harassment. But this is where Brenda revealed her amateurishness. She submitted an insurance claim that same day, including items that were never reported to the police. I had witnessed this exact tactic in Phoenix and Tucson. Create a crisis, eliminate evidence, and portray the target as an extremist menace. The responding detective, a perceptive woman named Lisa Park, seemed dubious from the outset. "Ma'am, this does not resemble a typical burglary," she informed Brenda during the interview. "Nothing of value was taken. There are no signs of forced entry, and your security system was coincidentally malfunctioning." When Detective Park questioned me about any suspicious activity, I presented a solid alibi. A family dinner at Elena's parents' house, complete with restaurant receipts and security footage that placed me 20 miles away at the time of the alleged break-in. Jake's journalistic sources at the insurance company confirmed my suspicions. Brenda had raised her coverage by 400% just 2 weeks prior. The same pattern had been observed in her previous cities right before accidents began to befall. Holdout properties. Filing a fraudulent insurance claim is a felony that elevates misdemeanor harassment to a serious federal offense. Brenda had just supplied us with another piece of rope for her legal downfall. Her next move was pure theatrics. An emergency community safety meeting held at the HOA clubhouse. Over 40 residents attended, along with a police liaison and an observer from the city council. The air was a mixture of fear, expensive perfume, and the artificial vanilla fragrance from those plug-in air fresheners that make everything smell like a department store. Brenda's PowerPoint presentation was a masterpiece of propaganda. Professional slides on property value protection and community standards, featuring carefully selected photos of our property that made our workshop look like a drug lab and our chicken coop seem like a disease-ridden facility. "We are not here to persecute anyone," she stated with well-rehearsed sincerity. "We are here to protect our children and our investments from neighbors who decline to adhere to basic community guidelines." But I had arrived prepared. I was accompanied by Carmen, who introduced herself as our family attorney in a voice that could slice through steel. My statement was composed, factual, and devastating. I presented a timeline of harassment supported by documentation that caused several residents to gasp audibly. I showed photos of the poisoned chickens, copies of the false police reports, financial records of Brenda's shell companies, and property research demonstrating her pattern across multiple states. Ladies and gentlemen, I concluded, this is not about community standards. This is about organized fraud disguised as neighborly concern. The audience's reaction was precisely what I had hoped for. Murmurs of shock spread through the room. Several long-term residents later approached me to apologize privately for having believed Brenda's story. But the true victory occurred in the parking lot. Brenda confronted me by my truck, her composure finally shattering in front of 6 witnesses, including Terry Wilson, who was recording with his phone. "You think you're so clever?" She seethed, her voice carrying across the asphalt. "Sometimes old houses just have accidents, electrical fires, gas leaks, insurance companies pay out all the time." The words lingered in the night air like a toxic cloud. 6 residents heard her make a direct threat to my property. Terry's phone recorded every syllable in high-definition audio. In my 25 years of law enforcement training, I had learned that threats to property, when combined with a history of harassment, amount to criminal conspiracy, especially when the person making the threat has a documented history of properties that mysteriously develop problems. Wednesday morning brought an official escalation that confirmed our federal conspiracy theory. I received a certified letter from the city planning office, a preliminary assessment for emergency property acquisition proceedings. The signature belonged to Councilwoman Patricia Webb. The timeline was 72 hours for a response from the property owner. In other words, the legal mechanism for a forced sale had been initiated. Webb's participation was the conclusive evidence we required. Her undisclosed business ties to Brenda, coupled with the official abuse of eminent domain procedures, violated multiple federal statutes regarding public corruption. Carmen immediately filed for an emergency injunction, while Tom traced the financial trail, revealing a direct monetary benefit to Webb through the acquisition process. The forensic accounting uncovered a kickback operation that made my municipal enforcement training seem like child's play. But Thursday delivered a discovery that made me realize our time was short. Tom's financial analysis uncovered something that made my hands tremble. Brenda had increased the fire insurance on neighboring properties by 400% in the last month. Her stated reason was concern about a potential fire spreading from an agricultural property. She wasn't just planning to oust us through legal means. She was anticipating or orchestrating a fire at our home. The insurance documents were dated 1 week before her first harassment complaint. The woman had been planning arson from the very beginning. New security footage corroborated our gravest fears. The same rental truck had been circling our property at 2 a.m. for 3 nights in a row. The license plate was traced to a company that had been paid in cash with fake identification. 2 men, equipped with surveying tools and cameras, had been mapping our property, not for an inspection, but for operational planning. Elena's discovery at school made everything fall into terrifyingly clear focus. Maintenance reports noted complaints of a chemical smell from school buses passing our street. The timeline coincided perfectly with odors of diesel fuel concentrated near the storm drains around our property. Someone had been placing accelerants in our neighborhood for weeks. Friday evening, I found diesel-soaked rags inside the storm drain 50 feet from our house, strategically positioned near our natural gas meter and electrical junction box. It was a professional arson setup, engineered to appear as an accidental electrical fire. I called Carmen with hands that were barely steady. "We're out of time. They're going to burn us out." It was time for the most perilous chess move of my life, letting them believe they had succeeded while I documented their crimes in real time. I moved Elena and the twins to her sister's house, using the cover story of a romantic weekend trip. Our social media posts featured cheerful family pictures taken 30 miles away. Meanwhile, I readied myself for what would likely be the longest night of my career. Jake and I set up our surveillance post in the derelict barn across the creek, near enough to record everything but distant enough to remain safe if the situation escalated. Our equipment resembled something out of a spy film. Night vision cameras, direct lines to the fire department dispatch, and backup power sources in case they cut our electricity. The wait was agonizing. Every noise set my pulse racing. The wind rustling through the trees, the sound of distant cars, the creak of old wood settling. The scent of the October night air was tainted by the lingering smell of diesel from their preparations. At 2 to 17 a.m., the rental truck we had been monitoring for weeks appeared. Two men in dark attire emerged like phantoms, moving with the practiced ease of professionals. They parked 2 blocks away and neared our property on foot, carrying gasoline cans and what appeared to be timing devices. My hands trembled as I focused the camera angles to get clear shots of their faces. These were not local youths hired for mischief. This was arson for hire, likely costing Brenda a minimum of $10,000. Jake whispered his observations into his recorder while I captured everything on high-definition video. License plate numbers, physical descriptions, and their methods, evidence that would be irrefutable in a federal court. The placement of the accelerant was chillingly professional. First at the foundation corners, then on the workshop walls, and finally around our electrical meter and gas line. The timing devices indicated they intended for the fire to ignite after dawn, when neighbors would likely assume we were asleep inside. The entire operation took 47 minutes from arrival to departure, long enough to guarantee total destruction, yet brief enough to evade notice. My self-control nearly snapped as I watched them douse the workshop where I had built Dakota's treehouse and restored Elena's grandmother's rocking chair. But intervening prematurely would only lead to my arrest while allowing the true criminals to get away. At 3:15 a.m., I reported a suspicious chemical smell to the fire department. Their response time was 8 minutes. Quick enough to prevent ignition, but slow enough that the arsonists were long gone. Fire Marshal Rodriguez, with whom I had worked on previous investigations, surveyed the scene and let out a low whistle. Marcus, this would have appeared to be an electrical fire, but it would have burned hot enough to be completely devastating, he noted, photographing the timing devices and accelerant patterns. Professional job, someone paid a significant amount for this. The 2 perpetrators made their critical error at a 24-hour diner 4 miles away. Security cameras recorded them celebrating, counting cash payments, and discussing their next assignment. When state police apprehended them based on our license plate information, they were in possession of fake IDs, $5,000 each in sequential bills, and burner phones with a single contact. That contact was traced directly to Brenda's investment account. The charges included conspiracy to commit arson, attempted destruction of property, and crossing state lines to commit felonies, federal crimes that carry 20-year sentences. 5 in the morning brought my favorite moment of the entire saga. Brenda's arrest. State police intercepted her at the interstate on-ramp with her suitcases and laptop, clearly trying to escape before the news of the arrests became public. The USB drive in her purse held property valuations, acquisition timelines, and communications with the arsonists. Additional charges were filed: flight to avoid prosecution, conspiracy to commit fraud, and my personal favorite, interstate transportation of stolen property, since her laptop contained the HOA financial records she had claimed were stolen in the fabricated burglary. At 6 a.m., Jake's article went live with the headline, HOA President Arrested in Arson Plot. By noon, CNN, Fox News, and NBC had all reached out for interviews. Social media erupted, with hashtag HOA Arson trending nationwide. Marcus's story was shared 50,000 times in the first hour alone, with comments flooding in from victims of similar harassment campaigns. The political repercussions were swift and gratifying. Councilwoman Webb tendered her resignation at 10:00 a.m., citing personal reasons. The FBI announced a wider investigation into municipal corruption by lunchtime. The mayor convened an emergency press conference to declare a complete overhaul of all city policies related to HOAs and a zero-tolerance policy for the abuse of municipal power. And the remaining HOA board members held their own emergency meeting, voting unanimously to eliminate the acquisition protocol and prohibit all property targeting activities. Their public apology, which ran as a full-page newspaper ad, acknowledged their wrongdoing and promised $25,000 in restitution to our family. Federal prosecutors announced that RICO charges were being considered against the entire network for operating an organized criminal enterprise across state lines to defraud property owners. Asset seizure orders were issued, freezing all properties that had been acquired through fraudulent means, with the funds to be directed to a victim restitution account. Carmen's civil lawsuit was on track to exceed $500,000 in damages. while Brenda was facing the loss of her real estate licenses in 3 states. But the most rewarding moment occurred when other residents began to share their own stories of harassment. 6 families had been methodically targeted over a 2-year period using identical tactics. The pattern was finally shattered. The professional predator had become the prey. Elena found me that evening, sitting on our back porch and watching the sunset cast a golden glow over our now safe vegetable garden. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Like justice?" I replied, raising my coffee cup in a toast to the security cameras that had documented everything. Slow, methodical, and legally irrefutable. Justice. The courthouse steps had never witnessed such a scene. There were 200 supporters, news crews from 4 different cities, and enough reporters to form a small newspaper staff. The morning air was filled with the sound of camera shutters clicking like a swarm of electronic insects and microphones being extended like weapons in search of the truth. Elena, Dakota, River, and I ascended those steps with the serene confidence of people who had followed every rule the twins had been adamant about. Attending, wanting to witness justice unfold in person, as River had phrased it. Inside the courtroom, Judge Patricia Morrison recited the charges against Brenda with the seriousness they warranted. 17 felony counts, including conspiracy, attempted arson, wire fraud, and operating an interstate criminal enterprise, along with 8 misdemeanor counts for filing false reports and harassment. Brenda's appearance was a shock to everyone who had known her as the impeccably polished HOA president. She wore an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, and her posture was that of someone whose meticulously built world had crumbled around her. Her platinum blonde hair was unkempt, and her renowned composure had fractured like cheap veneer. Federal prosecutor David Morgan presented the case with prosecutorial exactitude. The defendant orchestrated a systematic campaign of harassment, fraud, and attempted destruction of property that spanned multiple states and involved millions of dollars in fraudulent transactions. Bail was set at $250,000, a figure that reflected both her flight risk and the gravity of the charges. Brenda's family sat in stunned silence as the woman who had terrorized our neighborhood was led away in chains. The press conference that followed felt like a vindication delivered through a microphone. We stood on the courthouse lawn, with our burned property visible in the distance, a stark visual reminder of the extent of this conspiracy. Jake had arranged for national media coverage, transforming our local ordeal into a symbol of HOA abuse across the country. This was never about HOAs versus property rights, I stated, looking straight into the CNN camera. This was about criminals using community organizations as a front for theft. Good neighbors don't threaten each other. They support each other. The first reporter's question struck the emotional chord I had anticipated. "Mr. Thorne, how does it feel to see your tormentor in handcuffs?" "Honestly, I feel a sense of sorrow that it had to come to this," I answered, and I meant every word. "Elena and I simply wanted to live in peace and raise our children. We never sought out this conflict." Elena then approached the microphone, her voice carrying the natural authority of someone who has spent decades managing teenagers. "The message this sends to others involved in HOA disputes is clear. Document everything, know your rights, and remember that bullies rely on you being too intimidated or too weary to fight back." The support from the community was overwhelming. Neighbors brandished signs that read, "We stand with Marcus and property rights equal American rights." Dakota and River's classmates had come with their parents, transforming the courthouse lawn into something akin to a hometown parade. In a moment that perfectly encapsulated the absurdity of the entire situation, our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, arrived with 2 rescued chickens to replace our poisoned flock. The soft clucking blended with the laughter of children and the warmth of the afternoon sun, creating the very kind of wholesome scene Brenda had purported to be protecting. Carmen delivered the legal victory speech that would have made law students nationwide applaud. Federal prosecutors announced that their investigation had uncovered a multi-state fraud network targeting homeowners in at least 7 cities. RICO charges are pending against the entire criminal enterprise, she declared with evident satisfaction. All properties acquired through fraudulent schemes are subject to federal asset forfeiture, with the proceeds being directed to a victim restitution fund. But the moment that made national headlines came when a reporter posed the question I had been anticipating. "Mr. Thorne, do you have any advice for HOA boards that are following this case?" I paused, looked directly into the camera, and offered the smile of someone who had spent 25 years mastering the rules. Yes, read the municipal codes before you attempt to violate them, and remember, some of us were the ones who wrote those codes. The follow-up question provided the perfect opportunity. Any other advice for boards dealing with non-conforming properties? The law is not complex, I replied. Respect your neighbor's rights, adhere to proper procedures, and concentrate on genuine community enhancement rather than personal gain. It is as simple as that. Jake's live broadcast that evening featured our family in what he dubbed the most American interview of the year. Elena's message struck a chord with parents across the nation. Our children learned that standing up for what is right is not always easy, but it is always worthwhile. The symbolic culmination occurred when we returned to our property that evening. I planted a new oak tree where our house had once stood. For strength and longevity, I explained to the cameras that were still documenting our story. Members of the community brought soil from their own gardens, transforming the tree planting into a ceremony of reconciliation. Dakota and River helped to water the young sapling while neighbors who had once been too fearful to speak up finally found their voices. The rich scent of earth mingled with the cool water seeping into the soil, and a soft breeze rustled through leaves that would one day grow tall. Long after this story concluded, national media seized upon our story as a symbol of ordinary Americans who refused to be intimidated. CNN aired the HOA arson plot. One man's fight for property rights. Fox News featured when neighbors become criminals. NBC produced the code enforcer who enforced justice. Social media was alight with our story, which was shared over 500,000 times and sparked a hashtag property rights movement that would go on to influence legislation in 12 states. Judge Morrison's sentencing statement set a legal precedent. This case represents a flagrant abuse of community authority for personal enrichment. Brenda was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $2.3 million in restitution. Webb received 4 years in state prison and a lifetime prohibition from holding public office. That evening, we celebrated not with vindictive glee, but with the quiet contentment of knowing that justice still functioned in America. The victory celebration in the community park attracted 150 residents, including former supporters of Brenda who had finally seen the truth. We are not celebrating someone's downfall, I addressed the crowd. We are celebrating the fact that justice still prevails when good people use the law as it was intended. 6 months later, the sound of hammers on our property had replaced the ominous silence of that harrowing week. Our new home was rising from the ashes, quite literally, blending the best of our old craftsman style with modern enhancements that would satisfy any code enforcer. The insurance settlements amounted to $425,000, $340,000 for the structure, and $85,000 for its contents and our emotional distress. Solar panels shimmered on the roof, an advanced security system guarded every angle, and my expanded workshop was once again alive with activity. The aroma of new lumber mixed with that of morning coffee as Elena and I planned our future from the same wraparound porch, meticulously rebuilt in its original location. The transformation within the community was even more gratifying than our own recovery. The HOA members had voted unanimously to completely dissolve their organization, replacing it with a voluntary neighborhood association centered on social gatherings and genuine improvements rather than control and intimidation. Elena was chosen as the informal coordinator. They referred to her as the neighborhood friend instead of president. 23 out of 28 families now actively engaged in activities that genuinely fostered a sense of community. Block parties took the place of board meetings, and garden tours replaced violation inspections. The change was like night and day. My professional standing led to opportunities one had never foreseen. A promotion to Regional Director of Code Enforcement Education was accompanied by speaking invitations at municipal conferences across 3 states. My training program, Ethical Enforcement and Community Relations, was adopted by 47 cities aiming to prevent the kind of corruption we had brought to light. Elena founded the Dakota and River Thorn Education Foundation, using a portion of our legal settlement and community contributions. The scholarship fund was designed to support students who exhibited civic courage. Young people who were prepared to stand up for what is right, even when it was unpopular. Our first 3 recipients are pursuing careers in law, journalism, and public service. The legal impact of our case reached far beyond our neighborhood. Thorn v. Kensington has been referenced in 23 subsequent property rights cases throughout the country. Federal legislation known as the Homeowner Protection Act cited our case as a key example in congressional testimony. 3 states enacted stricter penalties for HOA harassment, with mandatory disclosure rules based on our evidence. Jake's Pulitzer nomination for his series on municipal corruption drew national focus to issues most people were unaware of. Netflix produced The HOA Conspiracy, a documentary for which Elena and I served as consultants, reaching millions of viewers who had never considered property rights abuse. Elena authored Standing Ground, A Family's Fight for Home and Justice, which has become mandatory reading in several law school property rights curricula. Our speaking engagements expanded nationwide as we shared our story at conferences and met dozens of families engaged in similar struggles. The annual Good Neighbor Day Festival in our community park has become a regional event. This year's festival attracted over 200 residents from adjacent neighborhoods, all congregating around the oak tree, now standing 3 feet tall, which serves as the focal point for our reconciliation ceremonies. Dakota has chosen to pursue a career in journalism, like Mr. Jake, while River has his sights set on environmental law to protect people's right to have chickens. Elena's election to the school board has given her a platform to champion a civic education curriculum that will teach children about their rights long before they need to defend them. Most significantly, our experience ignited a national dialogue on the balance between community standards and individual property rights. 47 states have introduced HOA reform legislation. Citing our case, congressional hearings on HOA abuse featured Elena's testimony on the human toll of unchecked power. The Willowbrook approach has become a case study in urban planning programs, demonstrating that neighborhoods can uphold standards through cooperation rather than coercion. Our chickens, of course, have returned, heritage breed birds named Justice, Liberty, Freedom, and Hope supply fresh eggs and provide endless amusement for visiting grandchildren. Their contented clucking now blends with the giggles of children and the morning sun warming the new coop that Elena designed with an artistic touch. But the most fulfilling moment came just last week when my phone rang with a now familiar inquiry. Mr. Thorne, my name is Sarah. I live in Phoenix, and my HOA is trying to make me remove my vegetable garden. I saw your story online. Can you offer any help? Elena chuckled as I began to pack the car. Here we go again. Road trip to Arizona? I confirmed, gathering my trusted municipal code books and evidence kit, because it seems we are now in the business of defending property rights. The fight for one's home and for justice is never truly over. It simply relocates to the next neighborhood in need of assistance, and Elena and I would have it no other way. Have you or someone you know ever encountered harassment from an HOA? Share your experience in the comments section below. Your story could help someone else realize they are not alone. If this story has motivated you to stand up for your rights, please click the subscribe button. Each week, we feature true stories of ordinary individuals who refused to be intimidated and ultimately prevailed. Because sometimes, David really does defeat Goliath,